The phone in Clive Davis's office at Arista Records had been ringing all week with the same caller, the same request, the same desperate insistence that he needed to hear something extraordinary. Cissy Houston, a name Clive recognized and respected from her decades as one of music's most sought-after backing vocalists, wasn't taking no for an answer. "Clive, I know what you're thinking," Cissy said during what would be their final phone conversation before that fateful night. "Every mother thinks her daughter is special. Every parent believes their child is destined for greatness. But I'm not calling you as a mother. I'm calling you as a professional who has spent 40 years in this business, who has sung with Aretha, with Elvis, with everyone who matters. And I'm telling you, not asking, telling that my daughter has a voice you need to hear before someone else signs her." Clive had heard this speech, in various forms, approximately 10,000 times over his 3 decades in the music industry. Stage mothers, pushy fathers, well-meaning relatives, all absolutely convinced that their young singer was the next big thing. 99.9% of the time, they were wrong. The kids were talented, sure, but talent wasn't enough. The music industry was filled with talented people who never made it because they lacked that indefinable quality that separated good singers from genuine stars. "Cissy," Clive said, trying to be both respectful and firm, "I appreciate your confidence in your daughter, but my schedule right now is impossible. We're in the middle of contract negotiations with 3 major artists. I have 2 albums that need emergency attention, and I'm supposed to be on a plane to Los Angeles tomorrow morning for meetings that were scheduled months ago." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Cissy's voice came back, quieter but more intense. "Clive, I sang backup on your artist's records when you were just starting out. I never asked you for anything. I did my job, I was professional, and I never traded on our acquaintance. I'm trading on it now. 1 hour. That's all I'm asking. 1 hour at Sweetwater's tomorrow night. If you listen to Whitney sing and you don't want to sign her, I will never mention it again. But if you don't come, and someone else discovers her, you're going to spend the rest of your career wondering what you missed." That last line got to him. The fear of missing something great, of being the executive who passed on the next phenomenon, was every music industry professional's nightmare. Clive had been on the right side of those decisions more often than not, discovering artists like Janis Joplin and Barry Manilow before anyone else recognized their potential. But he also remembered the artists he'd passed on, the demos he'd ignored, the meetings he'd skipped. Some of those artists had gone on to become massive stars, and those misses haunted him. "What time?" Clive finally said. 9 o'clock. She goes on at 9:30, but come early so you can get a good seat. And Clive, thank you for trusting me." After he hung up, Clive sat at his desk looking at his schedule for the next day. It was brutal. Back-to-back meetings from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening. Then he was supposed to have dinner with a potential investor, then go home and prepare for his Los Angeles trip. Adding a nightclub visit to Sweetwater's, which was all the way across town, would mean canceling dinner and probably not getting to bed until after midnight. Every logical part of his brain said to call Cissy back and cancel. But there was something in her voice, a certainty that went beyond maternal pride, that made him hesitate. Cissy Houston wasn't a stage mother. She was a consummate professional who understood the music business better than most executives. If she was this insistent, maybe there was something there worth seeing. Clive picked up the phone and called his assistant. "Clear my schedule for tomorrow night after 6, and call that investor and reschedule dinner. Tell him something came up that can't wait." "What came up?" his assistant asked. "I'm not sure yet," Clive said, "but I'm about to find out." Sweetwater's was not an impressive venue. Located in a basement on Amsterdam Avenue, it was the kind of place that catered to local musicians, jazz enthusiasts, and people who valued authentic music over commercial polish. The ceiling was low, the tables were cramped together, and the smell of decades of cigarette smoke had permanently embedded itself in the wood paneling. When Clive Davis arrived at 8:45 on that May evening, he was already regretting his decision. He was exhausted from a full day of high-pressure meetings. His feet hurt from wearing dress shoes for 12 straight hours, and the scotch he ordered at the bar did nothing to improve his mood. This, he thought, was exactly the kind of obligation that made him question his own judgment. Cissy Houston spotted him immediately and rushed over, her face lighting up with relief and gratitude. "Clive, you came. Thank you so much. Let me get you a better table, something closer to the stage. This is fine, Clive said, wanting to stay near the exit for a quick departure. Cissy, I have to be honest with you. I can stay for one song, maybe two. Then I really need to get home and prepare for tomorrow's trip. Something flickered across Cissy's face. Was it disappointment? Fear? But she recovered quickly. One song, that's all she needs. One song and you'll understand. After Cissy left to go backstage, Clive surveyed the club. Maybe 50 people scattered across tables, most of them looking like friends and family of the various performers scheduled that night. This was not the kind of venue where careers were launched. This was where hopefuls performed for supportive audiences who would applaud regardless of talent level. At 9:15, a young woman walked onto the small stage, and Clive recognized her immediately as Cissy's daughter. He had seen photos of Whitney Houston at various music industry events where Cissy had brought her, but seeing her in person was different. She was tall, strikingly beautiful, with a presence that commanded attention even before she picked up the microphone. But what Clive noticed most was the fear in her eyes. What Clive Davis couldn't see from his table at the back of Sweetwater's was how badly Whitney Houston's hands were shaking as she adjusted the microphone stand. What he couldn't hear was the rapid beating of her heart or the voice in her head that kept repeating, "You're going to fail. You're going to disappoint your mother." Clive Davis came here for nothing. Whitney had been singing since she was a child. She had performed in church choirs, at family gatherings, at school events. But this was different. This was an audition for the most powerful man in the music industry, the executive who could make or destroy careers with a single decision. And her mother had promised him something extraordinary. What if I'm not extraordinary? Whitney thought as she looked out at the sparse audience. What if I'm just good? What if he listens to me sing and thinks I'm nice but not special? Backstage, just minutes before she was scheduled to go on, Whitney had experienced what she would later describe as a full anxiety attack. Her vision had gone blurry, her chest had tightened, and she'd seriously considered running out the back door and disappearing into the New York night. Cissy had found her sitting on the floor of the tiny dressing room, breathing rapidly and crying. "I can't do this, Mama. I'm not ready. What if he hates me?" Cissy had knelt down and taken Whitney's face in her hands. "Baby girl, listen to me. That voice you have didn't come from me. It didn't come from your daddy. It came from somewhere beyond us, and it's been given to you for a reason. Clive Davis didn't come here tonight because I begged him. He came here because something told him he needed to. Now you need to trust that voice inside you and let it come out." "But what ifs?" "No what ifs," Cissy interrupted. "What if you go out there and you sing the way I've heard you sing 1,000 times? What if you stop worrying about being good enough and just let yourself be who you are? That voice is already extraordinary. You just need to get out of its way." Now, standing on the stage of Sweetwater's with a microphone in front of her and Clive Davis watching from the back of the room, Whitney tried to remember her mother's words. Get out of the voice's way. Just let it be what it is. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision that would change her life. She decided to stop trying to be perfect and just sing from her heart. "I'm going to sing a song my mother taught me," Whitney said into the microphone, her voice quiet and uncertain. "It's called The Greatest Love of All." The audience didn't quiet down. Conversations continued at several tables. Someone at the bar laughed loudly at a joke. The opening piano notes began, and Whitney felt her fear returning. They're not even listening. I'm about to sing my heart out, and they're not even. Then Whitney opened her mouth, and everything changed. The first sound that came from Whitney Houston's mouth wasn't just a note. It was a declaration. It was an announcement that something unprecedented was happening in this small basement club on Manhattan's Upper West Side. "I believe the children are our future." The note was pure, powerful, and perfect. It filled every corner of Sweetwater's with a richness that made the cheap sound system irrelevant. This wasn't amplified sound. This was the natural resonance of a voice that had been trained by gospel tradition, refined by years of technical practice, and gifted with something that couldn't be taught. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The person at the bar who had been laughing turned toward the stage. Every head in the room swiveled to look at the tall young woman who had just transformed a simple opening line into something transcendent. At the back of the room, Clive Davis felt the Scotch glass slip from his hand. He watched it fall as if in slow motion, watched it hit the floor and shatter, watched the amber liquid spread across the old wood. But he couldn't look down at the mess. He couldn't look away from the stage. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Whitney's voice moved through the melody with a technical precision that shouldn't have been possible for someone her age. She hit notes in the center of their pitch, held them with perfect stability, and then added subtle vibrato that made each note bloom with emotion. But it wasn't just the technical skill that was stunning. It was the way she inhabited the song's message, the way she made every word sound like she had lived it, felt it, meant it. The song's lyrics were about self-love and personal dignity, themes that could easily sound cliché or preachy. But when Whitney sang them, they sounded like gospel truth. Her voice carried conviction that made listeners believe not just in the message, but in her right to deliver it. Clive was no longer sitting. He had stood up without realizing it, his body responding to the music before his mind could process what was happening. He had heard thousands of singers in his career. He had worked with Janis Joplin's raw, powerful wail. He had developed Barry Manilow's emotional connection to lyrics. He had signed Aretha Franklin and understood what genuine soul sounded like. But this was different. This was all of those qualities combined in one voice, delivered by a 16-year-old girl who looked terrified, but sounded like she had been born to stand on that stage, show them all the beauty they possess inside. Whitney's voice began to climb toward the song's bridge, and Clive felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine surprise. He had thought he knew what the human voice was capable of. He had believed that after 3 decades in the music industry, nothing could truly shock him anymore. He was wrong. Whitney hit notes that seemed impossible, sustained them longer than breath should allow, and did it all while adding small vocal embellishments that proved she wasn't just singing a song. She was creating art in real time. Every run, every melisma, every small grace note was purposeful, musical, and perfectly executed. The bridge of The Greatest Love of All is where many singers struggle, where the melody climbs into a challenging range, and the emotion has to match the vocal intensity. Whitney attacked it with a combination of power and control that made it sound effortless. Her voice filled the room, wrapped around everyone present, and demanded their complete attention. At tables throughout Sweetwater's, people were crying. These weren't just tears of enjoyment. They were the tears that come when you witness something that touches the deepest part of your humanity. Music has the power to do that when it's done right, when the voice and the message and the moment all align perfectly. Clive Davis was crying too, something he couldn't remember doing at a performance since his early days in the business when everything was new, and his heart hadn't yet developed protective layers of professional cynicism. As Whitney approached the final chorus, she made a choice that proved her instincts were as remarkable as her voice. Instead of maintaining the power level she had built to, she pulled back. She sang the final, "Learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all," with a gentleness that made it sound like a prayer, like a whispered promise, like the most important truth anyone could ever learn. Then, for the final note, she opened up completely. She let her voice soar to a height and power that shouldn't have been possible from someone so young. The note seemed to go on forever, pure and strong and absolutely certain, before she brought it to a close with a subtle diminuendo that showed complete technical mastery. When the song ended, Sweetwater's was completely silent. The silence lasted for maybe 3 seconds, but it felt eternal. It was the silence of people who had just experienced something that transcended entertainment and entered the realm of spiritual experience. Then the room erupted. The applause that filled Sweetwater's after Whitney finished, "The Greatest Love of All," was unlike the typical nightclub response. This wasn't polite appreciation or enthusiastic support. This was the sound of 50 people who understood they had just witnessed history. People were on their feet, some applauding, some crying, some doing both. The bartender, who had seen hundreds of performers on that small stage, stood motionless with his mouth open. The sound engineer, a jaded professional who prided himself on remaining unimpressed, had tears running down his face. Whitney stood on the stage looking overwhelmed and uncertain. She had felt the performance going well, had felt her voice responding the way she wanted it to, but she hadn't expected this reaction. She looked toward the wings where her mother was standing and saw Cissy crying and nodding as if to say, I told you, but Whitney's attention was pulled away by movement at the back of the room. Clive Davis was pushing through the crowd toward the stage with a determination that made people step aside without him having to say anything. His face was intense, emotional, completely transformed from the tired, skeptical executive who had walked into the club just an hour earlier. Who represents you? Were the first words out of Clive's mouth when he reached the front of the stage. Whitney, still trying to process everything that had just happened, looked down at him in confusion. What? Who is your manager? Who represents you? Who should I talk to about signing you? Clive's words came fast, urgent, like he was afraid someone else might claim her before he could. Nobody, Whitney said. My mother helps me with bookings, but I don't have a manager or anything official. Clive felt a wave of relief mixed with disbelief. How was it possible that this girl with this voice hadn't already been snatched up by every label in the industry? Not anymore, Clive said, his voice firm but warm. As of this moment, I'm signing you to Arista Records. We're going to make you the biggest star in the world. Whitney laughed nervously. You haven't even heard me sing more than one song. What if that was just luck? What if I can't do it again? Clive shook his head emphatically. That wasn't luck. That was the greatest vocal performance I've heard in 30 years of being in this business. And I don't need to hear another song because I just heard everything I needed to know about who you are and what you're capable of. By now, Cissy had made her way from backstage to the stage area, and she was watching this interaction with barely controlled emotion. She had known, she had been certain, but seeing Clive Davis, talking to her daughter this way was almost too much to process. Cissy, Clive said, turning to acknowledge her. You were right. You were absolutely right. I'm sorry I almost didn't come tonight. I knew you'd come, Cissy said, smiling through her tears. And I knew you'd understand when you heard her. Understand? Clive laughed. Cissy, understanding doesn't cover it. I just heard the voice that's going to define the next decade of popular music. I heard the voice that's going to make everyone else sound ordinary by comparison. He turned back to Whitney. How old are you? 19, Whitney lied, adding 3 years to her actual age of 16 because she thought it would make her sound more professional. Clive raised an eyebrow. Try again. Whitney blushed. 16. I just turned 16 last month. 16 years old, Clive said, shaking his head in wonder. You're 16 years old and you already have better control, better technique, and more emotional depth than singers twice your age who have been performing for decades. Do you have any idea how rare that is? I've been singing in church since I was little, Whitney said. And my mother trained me. She taught me everything about breathing, about placing notes, about... Your mother taught you technique, Clive interrupted gently. But what you have, Whitney, goes beyond technique. What you have is a gift that maybe comes along once in a generation, and my job is going to be to help you share that gift with the whole world. What happened after Whitney's performance at Sweetwater's wasn't a simple contract signing. It was the beginning of a relationship that would define both of their careers and change the landscape of popular music. Clive invited Whitney and Cissy to his office at Arista Records the following week. He had canceled his Los Angeles trip, rescheduled his meetings, and cleared his calendar because nothing else seemed important compared to ensuring that Whitney Houston became an Arista artist. In his office, surrounded by gold records and photographs of legendary artists he had discovered and developed, Clive explained his vision for Whitney's career with a passion and detail that surprised even him. Here's what I know, Clive said, leaning forward in his chair. The music industry right now is in love with synthesizers and drum machines. Everyone wants dance music, electronic sounds, production that's more important than vocals. That trend will pass like all trends do, but voices like yours, those are eternal. Whitney listened intently, still somewhat overwhelmed by the speed at which her life was changing. I don't want to turn you into whatever the current trend is, Clive continued. I want to build your career around songs that showcase your voice, that let people hear what I heard at Sweetwater's. Ballads that make people feel something. Up-tempo songs where your voice is the instrument that drives everything. We're not going to chase trends, we're going to create them. Cissy spoke up. Clive, Whitney's still in school. She has one more year before she graduates. How do we balance that with recording and building a career? Carefully, Clive said. We're not going to rush this. I know every other label would try to throw her into the studio immediately and pump out an album in 6 months. But that's not how you build a lasting career. We're going to take our time. We're going to find the perfect songs, the right producers, the ideal timing. And yes, Whitney will finish school because education matters and because there's no rush. Great artists aren't built overnight. He looked at Whitney. I'm not interested in making you a one-hit wonder or a flash-in-the-pan success. I'm interested in building a career that will still be thriving 20 years from now. Are you willing to be patient and trust this process? Whitney nodded. I'll do whatever you think is right. No, Clive said firmly. That's not how this is going to work. You're going to be an active participant in every decision we make. I'll give you my advice based on my experience, but you're the artist. Your instincts about songs, about performances, about what feels right, those instincts matter. Never forget that. This moment, this conversation, established the foundation of what would become one of the most successful artist-executive partnerships in music history. Clive Davis had discovered countless artists, but with Whitney Houston, he found something more. A genuine collaboration built on mutual respect, shared vision, and an understanding that her voice was a precious instrument that needed to be protected and showcased perfectly. The recording of Whitney Houston's debut album took almost 2 years of careful preparation. Clive personally selected songs, auditioned producers, and oversaw every aspect of the process with meticulous attention to detail. I knew we only had one chance to introduce Whitney to the world, Clive later explained in interviews. If that first album failed, or even if it just did moderately well, it would be hard to build momentum. So we had to get it absolutely right. The songs chosen for Whitney Houston represented a perfect balance of showcasing her vocal abilities while remaining accessible to mainstream audiences. Saving All My Love for You demonstrated her ability to convey complex emotions. How Will I Know proved she could deliver upbeat pop with authenticity. The Greatest Love of All, the song she had performed at Sweetwater's, became an anthem that transcended music and entered cultural consciousness. When the album was released in February 1985, it exceeded even Clive's optimistic projections. It sold 25 million copies worldwide. Whitney became the first artist to have 7 consecutive #1 singles. She won Grammy Awards, American Music Awards, and became a genuine cultural phenomenon. But through all the success, through all the attention and accolades, Whitney and Clive maintained the relationship they had established that night at Sweetwater's and in his office afterward. They spoke almost daily, not just about music, but about life, about handling fame, about staying grounded when the whole world was watching. Clive became like a father to me, Whitney said in a 1987 interview. He believed in me before anyone else did, and he protected me even when I didn't know I needed protection. For Clive, Whitney represented the pinnacle of what an executive could hope for in an artist. Someone with extraordinary talent, genuine humility, and the willingness to work as hard as necessary to achieve greatness. The night I almost didn't go to Sweetwater's, Clive told an interviewer in 1990, could have been the biggest mistake of my career. I was tired, I was skeptical, I almost canceled. But something made me show up, and that something led to the most rewarding professional relationship of my life. Whitney didn't just become a star, she became family. The story of Whitney Houston's audition at Sweetwater's became legendary in the music industry. It was told and retold in books, documentaries, and articles as an example of how quickly life can change, how a single moment can alter the trajectory of everything that follows. But the deeper lesson of that night wasn't about discovery or talent recognition. It was about trust. Whitney trusting herself enough to perform despite her fear, Cissy trusting her instincts about her daughter's gift, and Clive trusting what he heard even though it contradicted his expectations. I thought I knew what great singing sounded like, Clive reflected years later. I'd worked with some of the best voices in history, but Whitney taught me that there are levels of greatness I hadn't even imagined. That first note she sang at Sweetwater's, I knew immediately that I was hearing something that would change music. Whitney Houston went on to sell more than 200 million records worldwide. She became one of the best-selling music artists of all time. She starred in films, influenced generations of singers, and created moments of musical perfection that will be studied and celebrated for as long as people care about vocal artistry. But it all started with a phone call from a persistent mother, a reluctant executive who almost didn't show up, and one note that stopped time in a small Manhattan nightclub. The glass that Clive Davis dropped at Sweetwater's was swept up and thrown away that night. But the sound it made when it hit the floor, the sound that marked the exact moment when Clive recognized greatness, echoed through the decades that followed. Sometimes the most important moments in history start with someone almost not showing up. Sometimes greatness announces itself so powerfully that even the most experienced experts drop everything they're holding and pay attention. And sometimes, in a basement club on an ordinary Tuesday evening, a 16-year-old girl with a terrified heart and an extraordinary voice sings one note that changes music forever.